My guest this morning is Scott Smith. Scott Smith is the owner of Royal Legal Solutions based in Austin, Texas. Scott is an attorney. He's a real estate investor. He's invested in properties in over 10 states, and he also provides, he has clients, over 1,000 real estate clients. Scott, welcome to CREPN Radio.
Hey, it's great to be here, Darren. I really enjoy doing a lot of these podcasts with everybody because we really have branched out in being able to help people nationwide, and it's really thanks to people like yourself that allow us to kind of share with everybody, how we can do that. And I'm looking forward to share some great information today with everybody about what they have to know to be able to protect themselves.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm looking forward to talking with you. And but before we jump into the topic today, if you could share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, tell a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I ended up buying my first piece of property actually as a commercial real estate. I did exactly the worst possible thing you could do, which is jump into commercial building first, and we bought an active business at the same time as we bought the building. And it was a transmission and auto repair shop while I was in my second year of law school. So I was going to law school full time. I was running a transmission and auto repair shop with a partner, and I was working as a DA, working as with writing appeals for them. So it was a pretty busy time. But since then, I've always been investing continually in real estate since that time, and so over the last 8 years, it's really honed me into. And I guess more particularly in the last 4 now, with only working with real estate investors and only focusing on that as our business.
So it sounds like your schedule might have scaled back a little bit since you just started practicing law as opposed to being a student and running a transmission office or a transmission shop and writing appeals for the DA, huh?
Yeah, well, I don't think I really have a high value for taking, being bored.
Yeah.
So it's, I'm always really active with either, I'm really big into jiu-jitsu and martial arts. I really like that stuff. I incorporate it into my daily practice. It's kind of like my reset every day around the midday. And then we have like meetup groups and meetings at night to do social events. I feel like spending time, sitting around is just not like a way that I really like to live.
Well, that's good. Well, keeps you busy, that's for sure. And let me ask you, you bring up an interesting point. Your first purchase was actually you bought a business with a building. Do you still have the business?
No, we ended up selling that after we got out of law school. The whole point, the intention with that was to have it to be able to graduate without having debt from law school. So once we finished that was up in New York. I moved down to Texas and took the Texas bar, passed that bar as well. I'm licensed to practice in 2 states. Come to find out, it doesn't really matter because if you're licensed in one state, you can pretty much help everybody everywhere as long as you don't, appear in court and try to hang a shingle in a different state. I mean, there's a couple of things you can't do, but in the modern era, there's really no reason to have multi-state bars passage like I did. And I took, New York and Texas are in the top 10 for the hardest bars in the country, right? So I just started, I took one of the hardest bars. Why don't I go ahead and take another one here in a couple of months?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, I'm looking forward to learning more about, talking more about insurance versus asset protection. And I'm wondering if how we should go here. If it would be wise to talk about some horror stories, or if it'd be wise to start from just the structure of what an investor needs to do to protect their assets, and then go into the why, or how would you like to go?
Well, I'll just start. We'll see how it goes. Right. So the one of the key issues that I think a lot of people don't understand is about what insurance protects you from versus asset protection. And insurance protects you from accidents, where asset protection protects you from everything else, right? And in the legal world, what we call that is insurance protects you from negligence. And so to really see this point, I mean, I know a guy who lost over $3 million in real estate assets from a single lawsuit. And what he did is he had all the property in his personal name, which is a huge no-no. You never do that. but he had insurance, and he thought that the insurance, from what he had read online and some other resources that he had looked at, said, well, if I'm insured, that's good enough, right? Because CPA or something told him that. What happened was he had a lawsuit that was outside of his real estate holdings. It was independent of it. I believe it was even like a car accident that he had that was really, really bad, and it exceeded all the limits of liability for his insurance that he had. And then what happened is that the plaintiff then could go after him personally, and because he had all of his real estate in his personal name, they were able to go after all of the properties. And so in one lawsuit from one accident that was unrelated to his real estate holdings, he lost over $3 million in real estate. And that's why real estate is exceptionally bad for litigation purposes, is because it basically, if you hold real estate in your personal name, it's like having a big orange sign that says, please sue me, because it shows everybody where the money's at and how much money you have. If they sue you, they can come after.
No, and that's a great way to start this thing, because as an insurance broker, we typically we try and evaluate what are the current judgment limits that are being administered, and then kind of a two-pronged deal, saying, so what are the current judgments, and then how much do you have to lose? So, I mean, like in your customer's case, he had at least $3 million to lose, and it sounds like you lost it. But just as a starting point for a conversation, because I've had those conversations with people, and they go, well, if I lost it all, I'd just start all over again. I go, well, if you're 20 years old and you've got a milk crate and, and a suitcase full of clothes, that may be one point of view. But if you've, been investing and you've accumulated $3 million in real estate assets, that's not exactly a prudent way to run your life. Just put $3 million on the line every day at risk.
Yeah. And just to jump in on that, Darren, not to interrupt you, but there's actually, I think there's I coach a lot of entrepreneurs, and I'm an angel investor in a lot of companies. And one of the things that we talk about a lot in that context is about how you should always judge risk by what your time to recovery is. Right. So a lot of times we actually misjudge this a lot in our lives, and it prevents us from taking risks about like starting your own business, or, asking the really hot chick out on a date or something like that. Right. It's because we would say that the risks there are really high, when actually the recovery, if it goes wrong, is actually pretty small. Right. Or as entrepreneurs or as business people right now, we'll say, well, I can't go on vacation because things might go wrong in my business, even though you're about to have a nervous breakdown.
Right.
So the deal is so when it comes to saying like insurance and asset protection, right, I look at it as the same type of philosophy. We always are really well insured, always, because insurance is cheap and it gets rid of all the nuisance lawsuits. But we also need our oh shit insurance, which is what asset protection really is. It's when insurance like excludes coverage, or the insurance company denies what's happening, or it's something that's outside of the insurance policies that you have in place. Most people don't really know all of the full limits of their insurance. They really just bought a policy and said, I'm probably okay. Right? I mean, if you ask people like, what do you really are insured from? They say, well, I don't know. I got an umbrella policy. Okay, well, what are the limits of your umbrella? They don't know. Right? So like, it's really kind of like you're buying something that says, I did something, so I'm okay. And the deal is to say, if you're going to come from the philosophy of saying that I'm okay losing everything, that might be fine, right? Like if you're cool going to live in a cave and with some camping equipment, I think that's awesome, because you can be happy doing that, and you've really beat the rest of us that have to try so hard to have all of this stuff to be happy. Yeah. But the real piece of it is coming through is saying, like, if you're okay with losing, then you need to know what your time to recovery is. Because if you're saying, like, I'm okay with losing this $200,000 from these investments if something goes wrong that I don't recover, that's a non-starter if it takes you another, like, 7 years to be able to accumulate another $200,000 to be able to get into your investments. Because the one thing we know about investments, if you talk to Warren Buffett or anybody, is the name of this game is not losing money. You can't recover from losing capital nearly as well as you can from not making as much a return.
No, that's an excellent point. Forget his whole order on investing, but I know one of the rules is don't lose capital, and the other rule is refer to rule number 1 or something like that. So
right.
Yeah, good point. Well, can we dive in just a little bit more on kind of the example you brought up? Because I think, one of the things that I see as a real popular thing is whether you be a partner in an asset or an investment or, various means of partnering. And, you bring up this issue of the outside risk where like an automobile accident, it dragged your real estate assets into the proceeds of the settlement. Can you talk a little bit about how, when partnering with someone, the actions of your partner can put you at risk, and what we can do to protect our assets from that angle?
Yeah. So you could say, for example, that let's say that you would end up having you and a partner decide you're going to go ahead and buy this house together, and you're going to buy it, and you're both going to say, okay, well, what we're going to do is, instead of doing it the smart way, like forming an LLC to be able to own the property and we in turn own the LLC, we're going to avoid those costs, and we're just going to buy it in our personal names. And both of us will be on title to it, and that'll be fine. Well, what you did there is just as bad in a lot of ways as buying the house in your personal name, but actually probably a lot worse. Because in that instance, you have just created what's known in the legal field as a general partnership, and now you are both equally liable for anything the other party does in furtherance of that partnership, which would be this particular asset. So if you put the money in and your partner is supposed to do the property management, and then something goes wrong with the property, like there's like a mold issue or like a rotten staircase and grandma falls through the stairs, or like the tenant really complains about, that there's a rat infestation and your partner never took care of it or whatever, right? Something happened that's outside of your control because, hey, you're not the one actually looking at the property. That's the whole reason you got into this, is so you wouldn't be having to be managing the day-to-day. Then now you're liable, and you and your partner are both completely liable to the extent of all of your personal assets. Contrast that with saying we're going to partner through an LLC, where then just the LLC is liable. So then the only thing that's exposed is the asset itself, and not both of all of your personal assets, right? And that's the same kind of example with the guy who ended up losing the $3 million, right? All he had to do to be able to stop that from happening is have a traditional LLC put in place, which is not even close to the ideal, right? There's much better solutions out there that we do for people than this, but all he had to do was the really low-hanging fruit, the option that only costs it's under $1,000 to put these things in place. And if he had for just a traditional LLC in place to hold his $3 million in real estate, then the car accident wouldn't have been able to attach to his real estate holdings because they would have been protected inside of the LLC structure. Right. So no matter just the low hanging fruit of stuff you can do has dramatic impacts into what type of benefits you get.
Got it. Let me ask you this. So in the instance where you have a partner and so they have a young driver in the household, and let's say you have set up the LLC. So you have Scott and Darren have created an LLC, and we've gone out, we've bought a property, and my son or daughter gets in an automobile accident and it blows through my personal limits to where now they're looking for my personal assets, and they find out that I'm a member of this LLC, the Scott and Darren LLC. Does that put my investment in that at risk, or is it, because it wouldn't be the LLC? The LLC wouldn't be a part of that automobile accident because the automobile isn't a part of that LLC. But as far as my ownership interest in the Scott and Darren LLC, would my ownership in that be at risk?
So the short answer is no, because LLCs are treated as different people than you are, right? Mm-hmm. The long answer is it depends. And it depends upon the charging order from the state. And it really matters what state you incorporate in because of that charging order. Because in California, your LLC does little to almost nothing to protect you if you formed an LLC up in California. But if you're forming up in the strong states like Nevada, Texas, Wyoming, and Delaware, then those have really strong protections from anybody to be able to attack your LLC. So what we always advise people to do is to form up in one of those states. We can form up in any of those states. I personally choose Texas because Texas is strong and cheap. It doesn't have year-over-year costs like the other states do with franchise taxes, et cetera, and state fees. And then you can take that LLC and use it anywhere, right, that you want to. So you could form up a Delaware or a Texas LLC, and you could use it for your Georgia property or whatever, or even your California property. So you're better off if you're in California to use a Texas LLC to own your California property than you are using a California LLC for that exact reason. Because California LLC, California resident gets sued, they can actually take the LLC membership.
Got it. So you mentioned the low-hanging fruit, kind of the structuring the ownership entity, if I understand right. Is that kind of the first thing somebody should do when they're investing is make sure they're investing through an entity like an LLC? Or
I mean, it depends, right? I would say probably not. The first thing you want to do when you're investing is make sure you're going to make money on the deal.
Okay, yeah. Back up. Sorry about that.
Yeah. I'd say that's probably not the first. And then I would say, I want to be able to make sure I'm making money on the deal, and then I'm not going to get screwed somehow into this thing. Those are usually my first concerns. And then I'm going to look at to say, what is my tax? Is there any tax implications here that I'm not seeing of how things are going to flow through? And that's probably 95% of where my focus is. And then the last 5% is probably thinking about what's the legal ramifications of how this needs to be structured. And the reason for that is because the legal piece is really important because it's how you make sure the whole deal could blow up or your whole life could blow up because of it. And that's one of the things that we think about a lot is to make sure that 5% is really rock solid into what people are doing. And so when you look at it into the deals, I usually say that usually if you have less than $50,000 in equity, just total that's exposed or cash or whatnot, I would say probably don't worry about having an asset protection piece in place because less than $50,000, unfortunately, you're really not worth suing, right? Because by the time somebody sues you, you're probably just barely going to pay for all the attorney fees. So there's really not enough there for somebody to really come after. Once you start getting above that number, though, now you start looking like you're a really attractive target. So I would say for your first deal, if you want to do it in your personal name, because, it's like I have a 3.5% down and I'm just trying to get into a property here, well, then don't spend, all this money on legal stuff. You don't have enough people to come after, right? But if you're actually investing and this is part of your retirement planning and your wealth building, then do it right and make sure that you're not going to lose money inside of your investment strategy.
No, that makes a lot of sense. On the just kind of the thread of growing, is there a point at which review, restructure, or is there more complicated? Are you there?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry about that.
No, that's right. I saw you went to
clicked over.
Okay, no, you went to the blank screen there.
Okay.
So as far as so somebody sets up, I mean, obviously, like you mentioned, if it's just a first deal, just get it, get in the game kind of thing, and then as your assets grow and stuff, is there a frequency at which one should address this or review their asset protection?
Yeah, what you're going to want to do is, if you do this right, well, what we do is we set up a series LLC with anonymity trust. And what that does is it compartmentalizes every asset you own for liability. So a lawsuit against one property or yourself can't affect any of the other properties. And it hides all of your ownership and the company's ownership of the properties. So really, if somebody looks to sue you, they can't see anything that you own. They can't see anything that your company owns. They really don't have any information to go on to know if you're a good target for a lawsuit. Then the next piece of it in that is, if you set this up once, it's good for the rest of your life, right? So in that sense, it's a pretty awesome thing that you can do with these series LLCs is that no matter what assets you do, no matter what you end up, it's so flexible that you can have the highest level of protections possible under the law with complete flexibility and scalability. So my input to everybody is saying, if you have, $50,000 plus in equity or cash, spend the money to have.
There you are. Sorry. Okay. Now you said spend the money. How was that? If you have the.
Yeah. So my philosophy to everybody is that if you have over $50,000 in cash, then spend the money to have the structures put in place that are going to be able to allow you to be protected for everything you have from now until the rest of your life.
Got it. So does that track along with estate planning, or is that do you bleed into that as well, or is it?
Oh, sorry. There is ultimately what you want to do with your estate plan as a living trust and a will. And we put those together for real estate investors and everybody who has less than $11 million in assets with the new 2018 taxes that are coming through. And what will happen is that your estate plan, your living trust, will actually own your company structure. So your estate plan will say, Bobby gets 25%, Joe gets 10%, et cetera, of this massive protected structure that comes into place. So even after you die, your structure still survives, and it's still protected even when it's passing on to your heirs.
Got it. So the bottom line there is that you do, not only on the asset protection, you do work with the estate planning element of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're really a one-stop shop for real estate investors. That's really what we honed it out to be, to say, like, once you come in with us, you don't have to talk to anybody else. There's not divergent opinions. So it's, you get one philosophy, one strategy that is optimal. And if you want to bring in other, experts to challenge the systems that we have, I'm happy to have that conversation. I mean, I've had it a bunch of times. And it just usually ends up with me having to do a lot of education to somebody else. But that's fine. Like, I like educating other professionals, so it doesn't bother me.
That's great. Well, Scott, this has been a great eye opener for investors and myself, and just kind of recognizing the need to protect your assets, because I mean we talk about insurance all the time, and insurance is clearly like you mentioned, it's the line against the nuisance type claims, but those types of risk that you run as an investor that go beyond that. And I think that's definitely worth thinking about, because clearly they happen every day. And I think most of us think about, well, it's, it happens over there, it happened to them, it's not going to happen to me. But, I think people don't realize that, like a car accident can literally turn your world upside down and cause you to lose everything. So that's great. Scott, before we wrap this up, what is the best way for listeners to find out more about you or connect with you?
Yeah, so you can go to our website, which is the royallegalsolutions.com website. You can contact us by phone, the 512-757-3994, or the scott@royallegalsolutions.com is my email address. Feel free to reach out anytime. We're happy to set everybody up with time to meet with our team and see if you're somebody that we can work with, if we're a good fit.
All right. Well, Scott, thanks for taking the time today to talk. Hopefully we can do it again soon.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Thank you.
All right. For our listeners, if you like the show, share it with someone you know so they can learn how to protect their assets. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio.